Our final learning module, Building Leaders in the Skilled Trades Classroom, features Lawrence Greenspun, Director of Public Sector Engagement at the Drucker Institute. The Drucker Institute, a social enterprise based at Claremont Graduate University, is driven by a mission of strengthening organizations to strengthen society, and its work is rooted in the timeless teachings of Peter Drucker. The Drucker Institute has been our partner in the design of our Harbor Freight Tools for Schools Prize for Teaching Excellence. Lawrence Greenspun created the Drucker Playbook for the public sector, which equips emerging leaders in government agencies with the tools they need to be effective. Lawrence, who is based in South Bend, Indiana, also teaches a graduate course in leadership in the University of Notre Dame's Esteemed Master's Program in Entrepreneurship. Leadership can and must be taught and learned, because just as you wouldn't want to go to a surgeon who is only conducting surgery based on her natural-born skills, explained Lawrence about the importance of teaching leadership, you wouldn't want somebody leading who is only dependent on their natural-born skills. Just like in round one, there is also a brief reading on this same topic for you to review, reflect, and respond. Once again, if you'd like to dig a little deeper into the topic of helping your skilled trade students become more capable and confident leaders, you'll find additional material in our resource library. You can click ahead via the main menu and use this added content to help you answer the relevant application questions with even more insight. Or you can just explore it later as you wish.
I'd say not only that leadership can be taught and learned, but that it must be taught and learned. Peter Drucker said, while there may be a few people that are natural-born leaders, there are far too few of them to count on for all the work that needs to be done and done well. Leadership can be thought of as like a lot of other jobs or endeavors. Think of a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, and it involves a set of practices. And practices can be learned and they can be taught. Another way I know that people don't start out naturally as leaders, that they tend to learn and be taught how to be leaders, is no one's a leader when they're 1 year old. Nobody's a leader typically when they're 5 or 6 or even 7 years old. And yet by the time people are 12, 13, 14 years old, they've often led something. Just about all of us have led something by the time we're in our early teen years. And so what's the big difference from when you're 4, 5, 6 to when you're 12, 13, 14? You've been going through school. And just as we teach and learn math and history and science and language arts, we're also teaching and learning during those years leadership. We can do it subconsciously and well or not well, or we can consciously decide to teach leadership and then do it well or not well. You wouldn't want somebody leading, whether it's leading in government or business, work, a nonprofit, a school, a sports team. You wouldn't want somebody leading that who is only dependent on their natural born skills and not on things they could be taught and learned as a leader. I'd say anything that requires joint human performance, people doing stuff together, Peter Drucker would say, with a mission, with a purpose or ultimate goal in mind, calls for leadership. I'd begin by asking everybody to think of the first time they led something. But some of them may balk at saying, I haven't led anything. I'll say, when have you assumed a leadership role at some point? Have them identify a specific time and then ask them to list some basic information about that. How old were they? What was the setting? Was it school? Was it family, a social setting, sports? What prompted them to take on that leadership role? Was it something assigned to them? Did they just step up for it? What led them to become a leader? How did it go? What did they do? What were the outcomes? How did things turn out, right? What challenges did they face in these situations, and how did they confront them and overcome them, or what proved to be too high of a hurdle or too big of a challenge? What lessons did they learn from this situation? Can they develop a list of like best and worst practices as a leader Don't just do best practices, do worst practices, because we're trying to teach and learn and not assume that they led everything perfectly. And then what would they do differently next time as a leader? If you have this list of leadership moments, first leadership moments, and have them get some details down uh, about, about that experience, begin to analyze them. How do the students seem to conceive of leadership? How many of them were situations where leadership was seen as telling other people what to do? How many of them involved situations where leadership involved the time they excelled at something? Um, how many of the leadership situations were ones where values were demonstrated? Were they as a matter of stepping up in an emergency or a crisis? Was there a mission or a purpose involved? Was it a group endeavor? Do you need a group of people to be a leader, or can you lead yourselves? These types of conversations and questions, exploring all of this will lay the foundation for them to understand what it means to be a leader and to understand the entire process of teaching and learning leading, something that I think we must do if we're going to become effective leaders, and something that should be started at an early age in the setting where teaching and learning is formally a part of things at school. This is something that Peter Drucker taught, that leadership is not a matter of personality or any leadership traits or qualities. Drucker said leadership is a matter of performance. That you do not need one particular skill, but that you need to apply your particular strengths to whatever the situation is, and that's what makes you an effective leader. It's why I want you to ask the students for an effective leader and not a great leader. Because when people think of great leaders, they often think of things that come down to personality. And as Peter Drucker taught, again, it's not about personality, it's about performance. And effectiveness, Drucker defined basically effectiveness as leadership and effective as doing the right things well. So that if effective leaders do the right things well, it's a matter of practices of doing those things. It doesn't depend on any particular quality or strength, but your particular quality or strengths that you'll bring to a situation in order to do the right things well. This gets back to the notion that leadership can and must be taught, because it's a matter of performance, of helping a group of people to do the right things well by bringing your strengths as a leader to that situation. Whether it's a classroom or a workplace or any type of organization, we tend to find hierarchies with some people at the top in what are called leadership positions and others as subordinates or followers below those leaders. So in a factory, you have everything from the owner of the company down to let's say, the regional director of a number of plants, to the manager of a specific plant, to the head of a specific team or department or area within the factory or plant, to a shift manager, to a team manager within that shift in that department, to maybe a small teams working where somebody has a leadership position. And at each step in a hierarchy, we're supposedly moving down a leadership level. This would even be the case in a skills trade classroom, where maybe there's a teacher, maybe there's students working in teams, but each team is led by maybe a more experienced student. And then finally, sort of what would be called the frontline workers, either in a factory or in a classroom. It's important in these situations, though, to make a distinction between authority and leadership. Authority is about having a certain position or title or power, being a boss. Leadership, as we've discussed, is about doing the right things well. It's about effectiveness and performance. So in essence, it doesn't matter in a chain of command what your position or title is. You exhibit leadership by doing the right things well, by performing effectively. Peter Drucker said, leadership is not about rank, privilege, titles, or money. He wrote, its essence is performance. So while in an organizational chart, somebody might be in a position of a follower, they're still in a position to practice leadership. Now, to help your students with this, what I would have them do is make a list of all the teams on which they're on, formal and informal teams. And as soon as you explain what you mean about a team, any group of people who are working on something together, have them make a list of every team they're on. And then for each of those teams, have them pick one of those teams. List all of the leadership roles that are in that team, not by position, title, or authority, though they can certainly use those, but any time where there's somebody who's exercising leadership by doing the right things well and helping everybody else to do those right things well. Then for each of those leadership positions, have them make a list of the best and worst practices they've seen or lessons they've learned about how they can become a better type of leader in each of those positions. So followership and leadership are part of one continuous process. And followership is and can serve as a type of apprenticeship for leadership if we go about it the right way. In the conception of effective leadership we've developed and the definition we've shared so far, effective leadership is presented as a marriage of vision, management, performance, and character in pursuit of a mission. And in that process, accountability is inextricably linked to both the performance and the character pieces. The emphasis here, and this is something that Peter Drucker highlighted, is that accountability does not involve some internal measure of our efforts, about how many hours we spent working on X or how many widgets we produced. Rather, the emphasis on the results or outcomes produced for what Drucker called the outside, the people or community or external entity whose need the team or the organization is trying to meet. So accountability is not that we spent 10,000 work hours over the past 3 months producing 5,000 ventilators. It's that 20,000 lives were saved as a result of our spending 10,000 hours producing 5,000 ventilators. Oh, and here are some of the stories of the people whose lives were saved. So effective leadership means making sure you have both quantifiable measurements of the impact you've had on the outside, as well as qualitative indicators, anecdotes, examples, stories that illustrate that impact. But accountability also plays a role in character. That piece of our definition of leadership that says effective leaders establish and promote adherence to a set of values and principles to ensure that the team works with integrity for positive outcomes in the common good. In many ways, Drucker summarized this concept of accountability by stating that all leaders, no matter where they're working, should be guided by the dictum captured in the Hippocratic Oath, primum non nocere, or above all, do no harm. You can teach this concept of accountability to values and character to young people by bringing up a variety of ethics-based scenarios. Could or should they steal the raw materials to make the ventilators? Or could, in the process of producing the ventilators quickly, would we be willing to work in a way that compromised worker health and safety in the production model? And then in doing this, you should be generating a list of do's and don'ts, the ways we'll go about our work and won't go about our work, that will serve as a kind of accountability checklist that governs the way we go about our work. In this manner, you'll link the concept of accountability and leadership for your students in ways that are practical and actionable. There's also a great story that illustrates in a very literal way what accountability looks like. We've included this story in video form in the resource materials, and you can share that story with your students or use it for yourself in preparation for a conversation about accountability and leadership.